The New York Islanders are scheduled to host the All-Star Game next year, but will they lose it, and what will the format be? Plus, we'll preview tonight's huge game against the Montreal Canadiens. All that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I'm Gil Martin. I've been covering the New York Islanders for almost 2 decades, and I wrote the book Ice Wars on the history of the Islanders' rivalry with the Rangers from 1972 to the modern era. So glad you could join us today to talk a little Islanders hockey. The Islanders may lose the All-Star Game, or the format may change. We're going to talk about that. We'll talk about 2 Islanders players whose future with the team is at a crossroads down the stretch this season. And we'll preview tonight's huge game against the Montreal Canadiens. The New York Islanders have not hosted an NHL All-Star Game in more than 40 years. That game took place at the Nassau Coliseum when the Coliseum was still relatively new. It was about a dozen years old at the time, give or take. When you get a new building in the NHL, it is expected that you're going to get, whether it's a draft or an all-star game or some kind of event, the league tends to give out those things to organizations that have a new building. Well, we just found out on Wednesday that the 2026 All-Star Game may not be what we expected it to be. And it's going to be interesting to see how the league proceeds. There were general manager meetings Wednesday, and Gary Bettman, the NHL commissioner, confirmed to the media that the league is, quote, reevaluating the format in New York after 4 nations, quote, raised the bar for what an All-Star weekend should be for the league in years to come. Now, the NHL and Bettman did say that Long Island is getting, quote, an event, but they're not exactly sure what that event is going to be. And I got to say, the All-Star Game as an event has been passé for several years. Back in the day, in every sport, All-Star Games meant a lot more. Back in the day when, it was hard to see all the best players in the world play more than once or twice or 3 times at most a year because, maybe in the United States, there was 1 nationally televised hockey game a week at most, depending on when. And you only saw teams when they faced the Islanders or the Rangers or later the Devils because those were the games, and only when they played on the road, unless you had cable, but those were the games that you got to see. So a player like Guy Lafleur or Marcel Dion or Wayne Gretzky or Jaromir Jagr, Mario Lemieux, you only got to see them a handful of times per year. And the rivalry, whether it was between the East and the West or the Wales Conference and the Campbell Conference, it seemed to matter more in the 70s and 80s and before then than it has in the last 20 or so years, where you can go on ESPN Plus or NHL Center Ice, and if you want to watch every game Connor McDavid plays, even if he gets traded midseason, you can see every game Connor McDavid plays. And it just doesn't have the same cachet. If you look at All-Star games, you go back to the 70s and early 80s, it was a hockey game. The players were not as physical as they were in a regular game, but there was defense. There was checking. The players played like it mattered. And then all of a sudden it changed. And you had games where there was no checking. And, you had scores like 11-9 as an all-star game score. It looked more like shinny or a glorified scrimmage than a hockey game. And the NHL did eventually add the skills competition, and they went with the 3-on-3. They've been trying to figure out something that works for years. Well, this past year, the Four Nations tournament changed the equation. It was so good, so entertaining. It raised the bar for what an all-star event could be. But you're not doing Four Nations this year. That is not going to happen because the NHL, for the first time in 12 years, is sending players to the Olympics. There's already a 2.5-week break for the Olympics. And this All-Star game was supposed to be a send-off for a lot of these players before they headed to Olympic competition. I do not see any way that an all-star game using the traditional format would be appealing. It just isn't at this point. And it's not just hockey. The Pro Bowl in football is now a touch football game. It's a joke. The rivalry between the AFC and the NFC, not as big a deal. In baseball, it used to be that the American League and the National League, those teams only faced each other in the World Series and in the All-Star game. So the All-Star game was important. Hey, the National League's better than the American League because we won the All-Star game, or vice versa. Nowadays, with interleague play, and again, the availability of any game you want to watch at any time for most diehard fans, it just doesn't have the same cachet. So the NHL will give Long Island an event. It could be an NHL draft. It could be an all-star format. Maybe they go, North America against the world as a preview of the Olympics, where United States and Canadian, American and Canadian players are on one team, and anyone from anywhere else, Europe, anywhere, they're on the other team, and you sort of have an Olympic-style preview. That is one possibility. But to just go back to the 3-on-3 divisional format for the All-Star game, which is what they had before Three Nations with a skills competition, it just isn't going to cut it. So the good news is Long Island is going to get something, and it's probably still going to take place in 2026. We just don't know what the format is going to be, exactly how it's going to work. And the Islanders ownership has been looking forward to this. They've been selling it to season ticket holders. They've been selling it to the fans. And it is a big deal when your franchise hasn't had this kind of event in more than 40 years. And let's face it, Barclays Center was not going to work for an all-star game with the obstructed view seats and the way the arena was put together for basketball. Nothing against Barclays Center. It's just not a hockey arena. And the Nassau Coliseum wasn't going to work because it was an antiquated building for the last 10, 15, 20 years of its existence. And it just wasn't going to be chosen to host an all-star game. So we don't know what is coming as far as the format and the date and the timing, but we do know Long Island is going to host a major event from the NHL probably next year. And I hope that Gary Bettman and the National Hockey League powers that be work with the Islanders and figure out a really good way to make this event work. So we'll see. We'll see what the league decides to do, but doing it the old way, just having an all-star game, especially after Four Nations, it just doesn't make sense. And in the future, if the NHL can eliminate all-star games as we knew them and do a Four Nations tournament every year that there's not an Olympics, I think that would be better, assuming that the style of hockey, the intensity level, and the caliber of play remains the way it was this year, or even better. I would take better. That would be fine. So let's see how this plays out. But, if you're an Islanders season ticket holder and you're trying to figure out, hey, are we getting the All-Star game? We still don't know, and we will keep you posted every step of the way here on the Locked On Islanders podcast. We are going to talk about two players who are at a crossroads, and how they play down the stretch will be big for the Islanders and their future with the Islanders. Plus, we have our preview of tonight's game against the Canadiens, and for our Islanders birthday of the day, a player who is still active, who is with the Islanders from 2014 to 2021, and who the Islanders had to get rid of for cap purposes. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Did you know getting a good night's sleep is the number one recipe for long-term success in life? I didn't. It took me way longer to realize than I'd like to admit. It was years of tossing and turning. I was always tired. I never felt like I could live up to my potential, but not anymore. Thanks to Bear Mattress. I used their sleep quiz and I matched with the Elite Hybrid. It's perfect for side sleepers like me. Now I wake up energized. I'm getting deeper sleeps and I'm ready to attack the day. No matter how you sleep, Bear Mattress has a match for you with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
So the Islanders have been playing better as of late, and they are back in the playoff hunt. As of Wednesday afternoon, the Islanders' chances of making the playoffs have gone up to 26.9%, which is higher than it's been in a long time. So, you go on a win streak and your percentage almost doubles. You lose a couple of games in a row, and it can go right back down to the 15% mark that we were talking about. But just like the Islanders are sort of at a crossroads for their season right now, there are some players who are at a crossroads with their future for the Islanders. One of the players who has been instrumental in the Islanders' recent turnaround has been Pierre Engvall. Engvall, over the last 3 or 4 games, has just all of a sudden seemingly played the way Patrick Waugh wants him to play. He's been going to the net. He's used his speed. He has done the little things that make a difference for the New York Islanders and make him an effective player. So, what happens? Before the last, let's say, week, everyone was talking about Engvall being a buyout candidate. He has 5 more years left on his contract. He is owed $3 million a season for the next 5 years. If they buy him out, the Islanders, they would have to pay him. There would be a cap hit of $1 million every year for the next 10 years. But here's the deal. If Engvall plays the way he has played recently for the rest of this season and the Islanders make the playoffs, does that change whether or not Engvall is in the future plans of the New York Islanders? I mean, this year has been frustrating as heck watching Pierre Engvall. He didn't make the opening night roster. He was placed on waivers. He was waived again later in the season with all the injuries and all the moves the Islanders had to make in order to get cap compliant and roster compliant. And yet, when he's on his game, I mean, Engvall had 3 shots or more in the last few games, got the game-winning goal against the Penguins, was instrumental in the win against the Panthers. So the question is, could Pierre Engvall go on another hot streak like the one he went on when he was first acquired by the Islanders that Lou Lamoriello decided to sign him in the first place to this 7-year monstrosity of a contract? Over the course of the season, 5 goals, 10 points in 47 games. That's not going to get the job done. Engvall is also a -10. And he's got only 54 shots in 44 games played. The thing about Engvall is that he has so much ability, the size, the reach, the speed. And when he plays the right way, the way Patrick Roy wants him to play, he is capable of being a useful third-line player who might even be able to, in a pinch, be on the second line. Wouldn't want him on the second line regularly, but, guy gets hurt, you need him for a game, guy slumping, whatever, you move him up. I get it. But inconsistency has always been his problem. And look, Engvall is not a physical player. He has 28 hits in 47 games. I don't expect him to all of a sudden become Matt Martin out there. But if he can give you 20 goals a season, and if he plays the right way, that might be possible. He's worth the contract. The issue is he's never done it consistently. He can get hot, but if you look at it this year, how many times Patrick Roy has called him out and said, oh, we need more from Pierre Engvall? And how many times did he respond for a game, 2 games, 3 games, and then reverts back to form? If you want to be an Islander next year, Pierre Engvall, and you don't want to be traded or have your contract bought out, you need to bring it every game. You're not going to score every game. You're not going to, be on the highlight reel every game. But you can't be a passenger. You have to contribute in some way, whether it's defense, passing, skating, making a play that keeps the puck in the zone or clears the puck out of the defensive zone. You've got to be able to contribute on a regular basis, and that lack of consistency has hurt him all throughout his tenure with the New York Islanders. If he doesn't finish strong, he's going to be gone. Plain and simple. So we'll see what ends up happening there. And then the other player that I'm going to include on this list is Scott Mayfield. Because right now, assuming that Alexander Romanov and Noah Dobson, who are both restricted free agents, are going to be back, and Adam Pelech and Ryan Polak are going to be back, you have Adam Boqvist probably going to return, not definite. You have Isaiah George waiting in the wings. You can bring back Scott Perunovich or Tony DeAngelo if they want to be a depth piece next year. And I don't know if either of them would welcome, to start the season as the 7th guy. But where does that leave Scott Mayfield? And Mayfield really has been in and out of the lineup. He's been a healthy scratch. He hasn't played a lot of minutes when he was in the lineup. And as much as Mayfield has been a really good New York Islander for many years when he's healthy, it doesn't look right now like he is part of the team's long-term plans. That if you break down the top 6 defensemen, Mayfield may not be one of them. And I like Scott Mayfield. He's a right shot defenseman. Those are hard to come by. He's got size. But that's not the way Patrick Roy wants his defense to play. Patrick Roy prefers mobility and speed with his defensemen, and that is not the strength of Scott Mayfield's game. I think the Islanders could work out a trade. There's always, like I said, a demand for a big right shot defenseman. There are plenty of teams. You're not going to get a lot for him, especially if you don't retain some salary, because like Engvall, you got 5 years left on Mayfield's contract. And again, if you buy him out, he's going to count against the cap for 10 more years. You know, that's, I think, at $1.5 million a year. It is not an easy thing to do. So how Mayfield plays down the stretch, and Tony DeAngelo for that matter, it's going to matter how they do. Because if they play well down the stretch, they may just earn a place in the Islanders' plans. If they don't, those guys are not going to be Islanders next year, whether it's trade, buyout, whatever. The Islanders may just part ways with some of these players. All right. More to get to on today's show. The Islanders and Canadiens play a game with huge playoff implications. We'll break down the keys coming up next on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. That's FanDuel.com. Check it out today.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Islanders, Canadiens, big game coming up tonight at UBS Arena, 7:30 Eastern time. And right now, if you look at the standings, the Islanders are right there with the Canadiens. The Canadiens have 73 points, and the New York Islanders have 70. They are right there. You win this game in regulation, and you are just 1 point behind the Montreal Canadiens in that very tight race for the wild card. You lose this game in regulation, you're 5 points back, and your playoff hopes take a big hit. Unfortunately for the New York Islanders, the Canadiens, they've won 3 of their last 4. They have really caught fire in recent weeks, and they may very well be the team to beat heading down the stretch for that second wild card. And they're not just winning. They have beaten, in those 3 wins in the last 4 games, they beat the Vancouver Canucks, who are fighting for a playoff spot out west. They beat the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. And they beat the Ottawa Senators, who were on a winning streak before that game, and again, who now hold the first wild card spot in the Eastern Conference. So right now, Montreal is playing like a team on a mission. Obviously, Cole Caufield is the goal scorer to watch. Nick Suzuki is a great setup man, but Caufield, 33 goals and 61 points to lead the team in goals. Suzuki, 49 assists, 70 points to lead the team in that category. Right now, the Canadiens are only 18th in goals scored, a little below average, and 23rd in goals allowed. But they're finding ways to win hockey game. The power play, 17th in the NHL, so right below the average. But the PK is 8th in the league. So the Islanders, whose power play has been dreadful recently, not going to have an easy time of it against the Canadiens. If you're going to beat the Canadiens, you got to slow down that top line, and that's Nick Suzuki, Caufield, and Uri Slafkovsky. Alex Newhook, Joshua Roy, and Patrick Laine. That's the second line. Don't sleep on Laine. He missed the early part of the season. His return has been important for the Canadiens' late-year run. Christian Dvorak centers Josh Anderson and Brendan Gallagher on the third line, and then it's Jake Evans, Emil Heineman, and Joel Armia on the fourth line. On defense, Mike Matheson and Alexander Carrier are the top pairing. Jaden Strumble and Lane Hudson are the second pair. And then you have Arbor Chekai, I can never pronounce that name, and David Savard as the third pair. The goalies are the goalies are Sam Montembeault and Jacob Dobes. So we'll see who the Islanders get. Montembeault is by far the starter. Montembeault started the last game against Ottawa, which was on Tuesday night. I get the feeling we see both starters in this game, Montembeault against Sorokin, but we'll see how it goes. Got to stay out of the box. Got to slow down Suzuki and Caufield especially. And don't forget Patrick Laine, 27 points in 37 games, including 16 goals. That would put him on pace for about 34 goals over the full season. So beware, this team has talent. They're on the upswing. You win this game in regulation and the playoff situation changes dramatically. You lose it in regulation and you're hurt dramatically by it. It'll be very interesting to see how this game plays out, but it's really critical for the Islanders to get the dub. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. And today is the 34th birthday of former Islanders defenseman Nick Leddy, the Eden Prairie, Minnesota native, first-round pick by his hometown Wild, 16th overall back in 2009, spent 1 year at the University of Minnesota, made his NHL debut with the Blackhawks in 2010-2011, won a cup in Chicago in 2012-2013, joined the Islanders right before the 2014-2015 season. He was a cap casualty in Chicago. One of the best moves that Garth Snow made as GM was getting Nick Leddy, and really helping that Islanders defense that year. And then he stayed with the Islanders through the 2020-2021 season, and then the Islanders had to trade him for cap purposes. He played with Detroit and then St. Louis. He is still active with the Blues. He's only played 19 games this year, has a goal and 2 points. He's already played 1,030 career NHL games, 74 goals, 413 points, 203 penalty minutes, had 8 goals, 38 points in 130 playoff games. I'm telling you, Nick Leddy, the Islanders made a big mistake in letting him go. And it was just one of those situations where I think Lou Lamoriello mishandled the roster and the cap and ended up losing Nick Leddy. One of his best games as an Islander at the Barclays Center, Islanders hosting the Colorado Avalanche on November 5th, 2017. Jonathan Bernier, the goalie for Colorado, Tomas Greiss, the Islanders netminder. And in this game, our Islanders birthday of the day, Nick Leddy, who was signed along with Johnny Boychuk in 2014. With the Islanders up 2-1, Leddy scores on the power play a minute and a half into the second period. Matthew Barzal and John Tavares with the assists. And then less than 3 minutes later, again on the power play, Leddy scores again. Josh Bailey and Matthew Barzal with the assists. Midway through the second period, Leddy and Matthew Barzal set up Johnny Boychuk, and the Islanders go on to win this game by a score of 6-4, 31 saves for Greiss, 5 assists for Matthew Barzal in this game, 2 goals for Jordan Eberle, but for our Islanders' birthday of the day, Nick Leddy, 2 goals and an assist. That's a 3-point night. He had 5 shots on goal, was a +1 in 21 minutes and 8 seconds of action. Nick Leddy is our Islanders' birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You could follow the show on X at Locked On Isles, and you could follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long, and I am live tweeting during nearly every Islanders home and road game. So join me for some instant insight and analysis, and it's great to talk Islanders hockey with you, game time or anytime. Everydayers, we're back tomorrow. We will have our key takeaways from this critical game against the Canadiens, and we'll preview Saturday's late afternoon game against the Calgary Flames. Every game is huge from here on out, so make sure you join us for that. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and of course, let's go Islanders.